here's what happened as humanity developed. First were the endless tens or hundreds of thousands of years prior to the emergence of written history and drama. The twin practices of delay and exchange began to emerge slowly and painfully. So here's a cool psychological study called the marshmallow test. And maybe it's even a reliable study, even though it was done by social psychologists. It's probably replicable. And it's a nice study. So you take small children and you bring them into a room and you put something that they would like in front of them, a marshmallow, and then you torture them. Basically, you say, "See that marshmallow?" And the kid thinks, yeah, man, I see that marshmallow. It's like, you can have that marshmallow right now. Or if you wait, I think the experiment is 10 minutes. Then you can have 2 marshmallows. And so that puts the child in quite a conundrum, because they're being asked to trade an actual, concrete, tangible marshmallow for 2 hypothetical future marshmallows. And it's not that easy to conjure up a hypothetical future reality that has the same significance as something right in front of you. And so it's an amazing thing that people can do that. And so then the experimenter leaves, and some children grab the marshmallow and just, chomp that thing down right now. Other kids, they videotape kids while they're waiting, and they do all sorts of things. They whistle, they look at the ceiling, they sit on their hands, they try to distract themselves. Of course, they're eyeing that marshmallow like a squirrel eyeing a nut, and trying to restrain themselves. And what I see in that is that the child's prefrontal cortex, the higher cortical systems, are warring with the underlying motivational systems, more primordial motivational systems that govern such things as hunger. The hunger system, hypothalamic system, says, there's something sweet and fat right sitting there, right bloody now. Grab that thing and stuff it down now. And I'm sure many of you have a constant battle with your hypothalamus with regards to sweet and fat things, and often lose. So you can feel some sympathy for the child. And the hypothalamus has these tremendously powerful tendrils upward into the brain, into the parts that we would associate more with voluntary control. And the voluntary control centers have these little weak ribbons going down to control the hypothalamus. It's pretty obvious, if you know something about neuroanatomy, what part is actually in charge when the chips are down. And it's not easy for children to learn to regulate those underlying primordial impulses, the ones that are wired in, the ones that we share with animals, but they do it. And the cool thing is, this is what Walter Mischel found, he's the guy who did the study, was that the long-term outcome for the children who can delay gratification in the marshmallow test is much more positive than it is for the children that are impulsive and eat the marshmallow instantly. It's delay of gratification. Now, it's likely that that's associated with trait conscientiousness, although that specific connection has not yet been established, but they seem conceptually very, very similar. So anyways, this emerges in children probably between the ages of 2 and 4, something like that. They should have it in place by 4, because it's very difficult for them to really interact well with other children without having that delay of gratification in place. Because if you can't delay gratification, other kids don't like you, because you want everything your way and you want it now, and you're liable to temper tantrums and that sort of thing. You haven't got the kind of self-control necessary to make you fun to play with. So you can see that emerging in children, and it's pretty interesting. And not only that, if it emerges, it predicts positive long-term outcomes, just like trait conscientiousness does, by the way, because trait conscientiousness is the second best predictor of long-term success over the lifespan in Western cultures, second after intelligence. And so in our societies, the people who do best across time are the people who have high IQs and who work hard. And I would say that's a pretty decent, what would you call it? It's a validation in some sense that our cultures are working properly, because what you would want, I would say, if the system is working meritocratically, like it should, and if you're trying to extract resources from those who can contribute at a higher rate, then what you would want to have happen is that the hardworking, smart people do better. People watched the successful succeed and the unsuccessful fail for thousands and thousands of years, and we thought it over and we drew a conclusion. The successful among us sacrifice. The successful among us delay gratification. What is, given the initial presuppositions that you have to make sacrifices, then the logical endpoint to that is something like, okay, if you have to make a sacrifice, what's the greatest possible sacrifice and for the greatest possible good? That's a good question. The answer becomes increasingly profound. And this is another one of mankind's fundamental discoveries. Sometimes when things are not going well, it's precisely that which is most valued that is the cause. Why? It's because the world is revealed through the template of your values. If the world you are seeing is not the world you want, therefore, it's time to examine your values. It's time to rid yourself of your current presuppositions. There's a famous experiment that I've alluded to a couple of times, I believe, in this lecture series, the invisible gorilla experiment. And in the invisible gorilla experiment, there's two teams of players, each with 3 members, one dressed in black and the other dressed in white, and each team is passing a basketball back and forth to the team members and milling about. You see a video of them doing so. They basically fill the video screen, and the white team is passing a basketball to the white team members, and the black team is passing a basketball to the black team members, and your job, as far as the experimenter is concerned, is for you to count the number of times that the black team passes the basketball back and forth. So that's what you do. So now you have an ambition and an aim and a value. And the ambition and the aim and the value, they're all the same thing, and that is to perform well at the task. Now, the thing that's so cool about this, and this is really so cool, it's just unbelievable that this is the case. It's like a complete validation of a certain element of the Buddhist worldview. So they pass the ball for a couple of minutes, and then the experimenter says to you, how many? And you say 15, and because you're happy with yourself because you've been paying attention, and the experimenter says, yeah, that's right, or maybe not, maybe you missed one. And then the experimenter says, did you see the gorilla? And half of you say, what gorilla? Like, really? And the experimenter says, yes. And then he rewinds it and plays the video, and like a minute and a half into the 3-minute video, sure enough, in walks this guy in a gorilla suit, 6'3" or so, stands in the middle of the game, right in the middle of the game, the same size as the players, perfectly, obviously evident, beats his chest for like a second and a half, and then sort of saunters off. And half the people who watch the video don't see the gorilla, which is absolutely shocking. And what that means is that your ambitions blind you to the nature of reality. Now, they illuminate some reality, but they blind you to most of it. And there's not a lot of you in some ways. You're a very pinpoint thing, like a laser beam. And so you just can't be attending to everything all the time. But one of the things that you might ask yourself once you know that is that if you're suffering dreadfully, then one possibility is that you're so fixed on the point, the fact that you're so fixed on the point that you're fixed on might be integrally related to why things are going so catastrophically wrong. Now, perhaps not, because, there's a lot of arbitrariness about life. And perhaps you suffer even when you don't deserve to. But it's possible that it's what you're clinging to that's hurting you. And it's even possible that it's the thing that you're clinging to the hardest that's hurting you the most. That could easily be someone you love. Like lots of times I see people in therapy and they're miserable for one reason or another. And sometimes it's because they have a very close relationship with a family member, and that just isn't working. The family member, for the sake of simplicity, we'll say, is not really oriented towards helping them have a good life. The family member is instead oriented towards making them as bloody miserable as you can possibly make anyone. And what would you say? Exploiting the bond between family members in order to enable that. And then sometimes the sacrifice that's necessary is either merely distancing yourself from that person, sometimes substantively, and sometimes seriously distancing yourself from them, like we don't talk anymore, ever. And so that's pretty damn rough, and it hurts and all of that, but it's a good example of the fact that sometimes in order to extract yourself from the miserable bit of chaos that you happen to be enmeshed in, you have to let go of what you love best. It's really worth thinking about, because the alternative too is to curse fate, right? Because if it isn't you, and there's nothing you can do to change, there isn't something you're doing that's wrong, then it's fate itself, it's the world itself, it's other people, let's say, because they're a huge part of the world, or it's the nature of the world itself, or it's God himself in whatever form you either believe in or don't believe in, because it's fundamentally all the same in the sort of situation that I'm describing. So, and you think, well, why not curse God? Because maybe it's his fault. And that's a really good question. And one of the things that I've tried to figure out over the last 30 years is, well, why not just curse God? Because there is this arbitrary element to existence, and we are vulnerable, and there is plenty of suffering, and things are unfair. Like, there's problems, right? There's injustice and unfairness and all of these things, and endless suffering. So why not just lay it at the feet of God? And whether God exists or not, in some sense, by the way, with regards to the metaphysics of this particular discussion, is not relevant. The point remains the same either way. And the answer is, as far as I can tell, that if you refuse to take on the responsibility yourself, and you attempt to lay it at the feet of either society or being itself, then you instantly start to act in a way that makes everything much worse, not only for you, but for everyone else, and maybe even for being itself. And so, no, it's not helpful. Now, if you decide that it's you've got the problem, maybe that's not even true. Like, maybe you are someone who's being tortured by the bet between God and Satan, and like, too bad for you if that happens to be the case. But it still seems to be the appropriate thing for a human being who's standing on his or her own 2 feet in a proper manner to take the responsibility on for themselves, regardless of the counter arguments that might be made against it. That's really something.